So you're up. So you?
Well, you first.
Me first. March Kabul. March in. And Chris is here. Where's Chris?
Hey Richard. How you doing, mate? You alright? Is it going on then? That sounds like enough balance.
Have you got a laptop?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Did you? I've only got LibreOffice. I would if I were you. LibreOffice does strange things.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I need to. But yeah, I have been out. I've been on weekend.
So. Huh?
I'm trying to think what track people would be.
I think we may be an entirely new track. This is why we got moved around. Yeah. I don't know, to be honest. Sure, I've probably got one last year. Academic track? Is there an academic track? Ooh. New version of VI Package Manager, everyone.
That's what I've learned with some of the budgets. It's like the accountants I use, they have it's just kind of stuff like that. I have written to wait for this, so I'm going to have so much
We should go, it's 3 o'clock. I'd like to say I prepared a presentation, but I went down the pub instead. So what can you do? This is instead of Andy Cleggs, who was going to do something exciting with control systems, wasn't it?
The most inspiring presentation is not here.
Yeah, sorry, so I'll replace that. What I thought I would do is it's all changed. National Instruments have changed their site, and it's all on Lithium, where it used to be on Jive. So if you use this is probably only applicable to people who go to user groups. Who goes to user groups? Who runs a user group? Who's an admin at a user group? You don't even know you are, do you? You are. And you are. Sorry, I did that. Tick, tick, tick. So what's changed is it used to be this rather clunky old-fashioned bit, and it's all just gone into the Lithium thing, which is essentially, this is just a forum on NI now. So they've moved everything over. There's things I don't like. So if you look at ours, but there's also things you can do. Now, for the life of me, I cannot make it sort things by date.
That's a known problem. It's a known problem.
Is it? Well, it's still nothing is sorted.
Why? Haven't Lithium been going for quite a long time?
Huh?
Haven't Lithium been going for quite a long time?
I would think so. But there you go. Not for my group, I'm sure we had 127 members. But we do have Mr. Fakes, who's my favourite member. He's some Chinese fellow who just joined and said, "Hello, I'm Mr. Fakes." And that was it. What you can do though, you can do slightly different. So as a member, let's have a look, I'm logged in. So if you're an admin of your own user group, you will need to get onto this site, create a site. I think you need to actually talk to somebody. So anyone who hasn't got a user group in their area or wants to create a user group, talk to NI about it, get yourself a site, get yourself a catchy name and a logo. That's all you need really. Might as well stop there. And then what you can do is this fancy screen here. I'm just trying to find out how do I done my homework. Oh, edit. There we go. So if you're an admin of the site, you get this button. Nobody else does. And you'll see that.
Wow.
Whoa! It's yeah, it's a pull down there. You get sound effects as well. It's brilliant. And oh look, I don't know what that is. It's like words and shit. But apparently that's what grown-ups programming.
Not anymore.
Anyway, so you get essentially it's HTML. So Mike Bailey pushed you to a site called W3 Schools, and they've got essentially you can cut and paste that, which is a template, and you can stick it in there, and you can change stuff, and it shows you your stuff. All the stuff we like at LabVIEW program shows you stuff changing, and then you just cut the HTML and shove it in there, and away you go. Let's cancel that. So for us, what I like is, and this is kind of useful, that we've got an open group, so anyone can look at this. So what I'm doing is recording these videos, and I'm going to park it on our media link, which is a YouTube page, probably, unless NI tell me to do something different with it. But I kind of like an intro page. So you click on there, you go. It's going through my mobile phone at the moment because I don't trust other people's Wi-Fi. So we used to spend a happy 20 minutes every meeting introducing ourselves, and I got bored of that very quickly. So that has to get on the website. So then you have upcoming meetings, and you then have a link to the media page. So the media page is probably the only thing of this entire talk that's interesting to any of you. I've been recording the videos, and this is probably where I'm going to link it to. So this is all our material links, and I'm just going to link that to so this is all YouTube pages. So anything that anyone within CSLab creates, I'll chuck it in there. Now I'm probably going to take the videos of this kind of thing, and certainly for the first few, I'm going to stick the presentations over them so you can see, but it'll take a little bit of time. So I may just chuck them up as is, and then edit them when I get time, because I'm quite busy really. And any other links, sort of blogs and things like that, will come from here. James has got his own YouTube. Chris has got his own YouTube channel. And they might put their own presentations on their own YouTube channels. But I'll do links. There'll be links. So there is a tiny URL sellotape to this table. I've done a slide. You can take that. I'm presuming NI are going to tap me up and say, can I put some links or something in there for the materials? And so when it got a bit crowded in the other room, people were ducking out and not seeing the presentations. So it should, hopefully, if everyone gives me permission, be all that. And it is 15:07 on a minute. So any questions? I don't think there will be. Part two. Quick fire round.
Right, so I'm first up. So, firstly, I'm having laptop issues, so hopefully this is going to work. But it's a presentation I gave just over a year ago on a user interface touchscreen toolkit for LabVIEW, something that I was working on.
Just do nothing.
It's called blue screen.
There's no blue on here. And it took me over an hour to present it, so I'm kind of hoping that I can condense that to 8 minutes.
I've given you 1 minute, man. You've got to get your laptop there. No pressure.
While we get that sorted out, there is also a generic user group page for user group resources. So if you set up a new user group, and I've created this community section where there is suggested content, ways to manage a user group, how to talk with NI so that you can liaise with them better.
Yeah, I just wanted a grown up to present for me. So on that page is the template that I swiped to do the page. I give you a template page with loads of links and tables. Anyway, actually represent. And I think it's in the news site. If you go to user groups, it's off that first page.
Go to your page and right click view source. Go to our page, right click view source, copy paste.
Well, it seems to take pretty much anything. It's only HTML. You can be as posh as you like. Me, with my limited attention span, you get a couple of links.
Can't hurt.
And a table.
Give it a shot.
You get lucky to get that.
So I guess that means it's got rid of the document. Before you had documents or forums.
The documents have all been forum. They're all forum pages now. So any document you put up has become a forum page with an attachment.
So everything just the same.
Just a forum. Yeah, it's a forum item.
It's a good job we've advanced.
Yeah, well, this will be the same. Advanced going backwards.
And then you'll fast click it more information.
If you ever try to find anything on the old system, it's just hilarious. It's like it's just
Okay, right. Thank you for your patience. So we appear to be running. So this was something that I put together pretty much on a whim because I needed to present at the CLA Summit and I had no ideas. And I put together an open source toolkit for touch-based behavior in your user interfaces in LabVIEW. It's called SWISH, and this was part of the Cambridge LabVIEW user group. And straight into the good stuff, straight into the demo. Let's see if this runs. Right, so this is a LabVIEW VI, and this demonstrates how you may wish to interact with a touch screen. And this is why I need to use my laptop for this, because it's got a touch screen. Plenty of volunteers have suggested I could borrow theirs. So here we've got a selection of albums, and from that you may assume that you can swipe that. You can glide it left and you can glide it right. And it's not working. My laptop is not working.
I get bonus demo points for that.
Oh yeah, it's not working at all. Let's try. Oh, that's just fantastic.
Because the file's not open.
Are you?
No, it doesn't even work with the mouse. So something has gone probably wrong with that. How's my time doing?
We are. I don't have to be a time fascist. I think what we can.
Yeah, that's probably good advice. But
This is a good illustration of regular LabVIEW
it takes a really long time to load.
There's not a raffle at the end of the day or anything like that we have to attend, is there? I was told I have to be good and get everyone out of the session. Once it gets the grain, really.
Look, it's compiling. It's not just loading, it's compiling now. Lesson learned. Don't ever put your laptop in standby mode with LabVIEW running.
Say, Rich, have you got any One Direction?
No comments on my music preferences, by the way. So, yes, you can swipe this. And as you can see, I'm just touching it with my finger on the screen. And if you swipe it fast, oh, wasn't meant to grab that.
Yeah.
Swipe it fast, it keeps going. So this is a kind of a slide reaction that you might want. You can tap on these, and they do play. Turn the volume off, you can't hear it. And this is basically like a carousel, so they're actually just picture objects. There's a whole batch of them on the front panel, and the way that the code works is it slides them to the right, and then it makes it magically appear on the left to reuse it, and slides it. So you only need as many picture objects as fit on the screen, but the actual number of pictures you use could be an indefinite library, and it will just keep cycling through those. We've also got this other one on the left, and as you can see, it even shows you where my finger is. How nice is that? Look at that. If I try and let that go there, it won't let me. So you've got also the idea that you may want to swipe something, and that object is only allowed to either be fully open or fully closed. So you've got these parameters that you can impose on the behaviors. right? So for this one, obviously it can stop in any position. I don't care if I can only see a tenth of that one on the left-hand side of the screen. And if you think about how you would interface with your phone, it's all very touch-based. And there are dozens of different ways that you might want to interact with that. You've got your pinch for zooming in and out. You've got your rotate with the 2-tap. And you can a whole plethora of other types. Now in this toolkit development, I didn't have time to create them all because it was just something I was doing on the side as a bit of a hobby. But what was important to me was that it was really, really easy to use, right? So I bet almost everyone in this room could probably create code that allows you to do that. If you wanted to use user events and monitor the mouse press, and you wanted to move objects with property nodes, we could all have a go at that. But if you wanted to create a reusable toolkit that was really easy to use, that's the entire block diagram for that VI. There is nothing else. So what we have on here is, and you may notice this VI here at the top. That's it. If you drop that down on your block diagram and you configure your user interface to have all of these touch-based interactions, what that VI does, that is a VI icon, doesn't actually look like one. What that will actually do is launch the SWISH service. And the SWISH service will handle all of those user interface interactions for you. So it takes away from your block diagram the need to have any code to handle any of those interactions. Nice and simple, right? So you can just maintain on your block diagram the actual mechanics of your VI, what it needs to do. You don't need to put any other code in there for handling the user interface interactions. So then you might wonder, how on earth do you actually program all those different elements on your front panel to do what I want them to do? How do I define the slides and the swipes? Well, the simplest way is to use, and I'm taking a chance here because I haven't tested this, there should be, wrong version of LabVIEW. There's a tool, and then there's a wizard that I created. This is LabVIEW 2016, and I've only installed that in the previous version. So you can drop that down, I'll show it in the presentation, and that will allow you to programmatically configure your user interface. So if this is all open source, by the way, so if anybody want to get hold of the code and use it or try it or build with it, it is incomplete, but as you can see it's largely working. So if you want to go to bitbucket.org, and that's my account on there, you can sign up, you can get a copy of the source code. As Steve has been pointing out. Sorry? You do, I'm afraid, yeah. So all of this is going to be made available, so you can get that link later. I'll skip a few slides. I say this is an hour's presentation. There is an architecture for it. To go through some of the concepts, we have swidgets, which are the objects you want to manipulate on your front panel. We've got actions, which are the effects that you want to apply to those objects. And then we have the events, which would basically be the user interface touching the screen. But events are also programmatic, so you could have other VIs actually manipulating user interface components on somewhere else on your front panel remotely or separately. It's also class-based, so that you can create your own child classes that override the behaviors of the default built-in ones. So firstly, we've got objects, a generic object at the top, that's abstract class, you can't build that. But then we've got the 4 child classes, so basic controls on your front panel. You might do multiple controls at once, that's the carousel. Your panel reference, you might want to move a whole front panel around. Splitters, you might want to move a splitter. You can make more of these, you can make children of them. I'm rushing, am I running out of time?
Yeah, well, that's not
Actions.
no pressure though.
Right, I'll stop soon. Actions, of course, we've got all the different types of actions. So we've got tap, which is when I tapped on a cover and it played the music. We've got motion, of which there are child classes. So we've got simple moves, advanced moves, not designed, swipes, carousel. Keep going, you can just extend this with your own types. And then we've got events, of course. These are the things that cause the actions to happen. So mainly they're all based on mouse events. So you've got your mouse down, your mouse center. You'll all be familiar with those with your event structure. So LabVIEW in the background handles all of that. So the way you build the definition, this is what I was trying to get to. So for this side settings tab, it's just a big control in LabVIEW. It has one action, which is a swipe, and the event for that is when you touch it on the screen with the mouse. You can either do it programmatically to build all that in code, which is a bit of work, or you can use the configuration utility, which is what I wanted to load, but I haven't got it installed in this version of LabVIEW. And this allows you to pick your objects on your front panel, say I want that to have swipe action from where it is now to about 300 pixels further to the right. I want it to snap to ends, which is what it did. It wasn't allowed to stop in the middle. If you let it go in the middle, you can define parameters that allow you to dictate how fast it will move and the friction and all that, this acceleration stuff. Nice things. We'll skip that. Oh, we'll skip that as well, because I've run out of time. But that's how the service works. Any questions? Sorry for the rush.
Did we video your
No.
full presentation?
No.
There is no video.
This was presented at the CLA summit in
It wasn't
the
CERN,
Rome.
it was Rome, I think.
It was Rome, so
Yeah.
that was last year.
There wasn't any video.
And it wasn't recorded, so this isn't available. But there's a community group for SWISH, just like the user group for C-Slug. There's a community group just for this toolkit. And I have to admit, because it's a personal project, I had a little motivation to actually keep working on it. So the state it's in now is the state it was in when I presented it last year. But if there's a lot of interest in this and anybody wants to help contribute to the content, I'm willing to come back to this and keep developing it and make it more user-friendly. Yes?
There was a question about, technical question.
Yeah.
Your slides thing, the slides out, how do you do it? Is that a, well, how do you do that? Is that a VI or is it a moving splitter bar?
No, it's just it's an object on your front panel. It's just a cluster control,
Okay.
right? So its position is varied using a property node for position. So when you register all your objects by defining all their behaviors, and that VI gets to run on your block diagram, it scans your front panel for all the objects that have got definitions. It then passes those into a service that runs. So we saw earlier today presentation on call and forget. So there's a service that's called that cares about those objects. That analyzes those objects for all the different events that can occur that influence it. That's another service. So this is dynamic event registration. When this recognizes an event has happened on a control, it then says time to act on that control. So it talks to the action handler, which is just a high priority timed loop. And that continuously modifies the parameters of that object based on whatever you've set. And that obviously updates your front panel. So there's a series of services that run in the background which are needed for this to run blindly to the developer. The ambition was that this would be something that you could install, use the configuration utility to define how your front panel controls would behave. You would click save, and then you just drop that on your block diagram, and you never need to worry about it again. And it works, but it's just not finished.
I actually have something similar. I have something running in the background that I configure, and then it adds features, not to things like that, but to graphs. So it adds things on graphs.
I've seen that,
And,
yes.
so it's easy to drop it in, and then you just configure it and say what you want, and then it goes. And you just don't have to worry about it. So it is very useful to have something like this. It's very powerful.
It has a lot of potential. Yeah.
But what you need is a project. We need to use it.
I need someone to pay me to finish it.
Being paid is good.
It is. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'll clap, but I also noticed that nobody clapped mine. I'm not bitter or anything, you know. But it's noted. Who's next? Martin.
Hey guys, Martin Griffiths. I am from the user group in the northwest. So if you're around Manchester, Liverpool, that kind of area, that's where I'm from. So carrying on the UI theme, which is a popular one at the moment. We did a project last year and into this year, but we needed to create a user interface for TestStand, and that has its pros and cons. So with your you've got your three options here that I think you've got with TestStand really. So the customer that we did this for, they'd had experience with TestStand for their R&D kind of development testing, and the guy who created the sequences ran the test rig. So he was fine using the TestStand editor window to create his sequences and then run them, and that was fine. But they wanted to deploy some test TestStand and test sequences to the shop floor for production test. And when you do that, the TestStand development UI isn't really up to it. It's not simple enough. There's hundreds of tiny little buttons on there, and it's complicated. So they wanted a custom user interface for it. So if you're going to do that, you've got two options really. You can in LabVIEW there's some TestStand indicators and controls, and you can create a user interface in LabVIEW using those, and it makes it quite simple. You drop on the left-hand side of that picture there. That's like a sequence view control. So you drop that onto your LabVIEW front panel, and that pretty much handles all the information getting updated from TestStand, and you don't really have to worry about how it does it. It just does it automatically. And the buttons down there are the same. You push them, and it starts off a sequence in TestStand, and everything's good, and you don't have to worry about it. The problem with that is, and that's our first version of the prototype that we tried to deliver to them, and so I was hopeful, but they said, no, we're not having that at all, really, unfortunately. They'd done a wireframe, which was looking more like what you see on the right-hand side there, and they wanted it to look exactly like that. And the issue, if you use some of these TestStand controls, you can't really customize them at all, really. You get what you get, and they look what they look like. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and what we ended up with is what's over on the right-hand side there. That's kind of a custom UI created with LabVIEW. That's a tree control, all sorts of kind of custom buttons, and we do all sorts of scaling and things like that. So that took a long time, and there's a lot of code in there. So what I was just going to do now is give you a couple of tips from that, of the main lessons that we got from that, really, because it's possible to create completely custom UIs. There is a lot of work in there, but you can make kind of nice and simple interfaces to TestStand. So I've got a few tips really of what we learned and what made things much easier. So the first one is, if you want to get updates from TestStand about where your sequence is, what results you're getting, what the progress is. Weird. TestStand actually broadcasts a number of user interface messages, and there's about 20 that come as default. Number 4 is called a trace event message, which is really interesting actually. So what's going on there? This is a callback VI in our top level user interface. We're handling the trace event there. So each time that comes in, what actually happens here is you get a reference to the current step that's executing or just finished executing. And through a bunch of property nodes in that sub-VI there, and I'm not going to open that up because there's a lot of code going on in there, unbundling a lot of property nodes. You can basically step by step figure out what type of step it is, what properties that step's got, and so if it's a limit test, you can get your limits, your current value, your pass or fail status. If it's a sequence call, you can get all sorts of things like that. So we're basically using those to convert everything TestStand into that cluster of Boolean strings for description values and things like that. So once you get that into LabVIEW, we're then broadcasting a user event which we can just use to populate message bars, that tree controller we're formatting for our sequence. So that is a really nice, that kind of for us was a kind of a critical nice event to come across that you can get a bunch of information from TestStand out of. Key thing you need to know, you have to have tracing. There's a kind of a tracing checkbox in TestStand. You have to have that kind of checked. You have to have tracing enabled in your sequences. But if you do that, you're good to go on getting information from your sequences. And then the other way around, so if you want to send information back to TestStand, again it can get a little bit complicated. So what our aim basically was to have standalone TestStand, just running its sequences, and a completely standalone executable user interface, and they just kind of message each other. That we didn't want them coupled together. So that's a nice idea. It then gets a bit complicated when you want to send information from that user interface back to TestStand. So what we're actually doing here is we're using user interface messages again. So we've created some custom ones here. So index 10,000 onwards, you can create whatever message you want. So we're sending them out here. And those events can be synchronous or asynchronous.
So if it's synchronous, it generates that event and it doesn't continue on to the next step until your callback VI has actually handled it. So you can use that. So again, you're looking at property nodes, kind of unfortunately. So you get in that code on the right-hand side there, that's handling the event that's just been generated. So you can get references to that event that's running at the moment, and you can write values back into your test sequence. So this is what we do at the start of our test sequence. We basically poll our user interface for serial numbers, production orders, all things like that that are in the user interface. We just want to squirt those back to TestStand. So that's a nice way to do that. Last tip. You've got to keep track of your references in TestStand. I don't know if everyone's ever tried doing this, but if you don't handle your references, it complains. It pops you up with an error message with 1,000 different things that you've done wrong, and it crashes LabVIEW for the next 10 times, it seems. So we ended up with something like this. We tried to do a flow chart of when we're loading sequences, running them, stopping them, and really then try to keep track of what references you're opening and closing at what time. That really helps you, because it's so if you don't do that, you get these crazy messages, and it gets difficult to do. Also on the right hand side over there, a nice toolkit to use. So Mattis Boemert, who's a TestStand architect, has put together a API to interact with TestStand and to make opening all these references a little bit easier and storing them, and he's got some nice dynamic dispatch functions in there, so you can override some kind of key functionality for your user interface. So that's on the forums. That's worth taking a look at. That simplifies a lot of this, a lot of these functions. So that's one really worth taking a look at. Okay, thanks a lot. So that's what we ended up with, and it took a while, but I'm quite pleased with it, and it's exactly what our customer wanted. So yeah, I think it was a good solution for us in the end. There you go, magically skipping on again. Any questions for anyone?
Did you go as far as creating an editor within your UI, or do you?
No, just use the happy. So the only objective of this was a foolproof user interface for shop floor people to run sequences. Editing sequences is just a whole different thing, and they're happy to use a sequence editor for that. So the scope of this was only to make something simple to run sequences.
So the UI is kind of optional. You can still run everything from TestStand.
Yeah, so that's why we were aiming to keep things completely standalone in the sequence execution and the user interface, and that's why we ended up with this messaging stuff in there, so that you're not dependent on the UI to run sequences. Cool. All right, great. Thanks a lot, guys.
Kabul.
Right, so this is going to go horribly wrong.
Confidence.
Yeah.
Huge confidence.
So can I get a quick show of hands while I try and do this? How many of you are certified users?
Certified in what?
Yeah, exactly. Any certification at
Certified
all.
by a mental illness.
Certified in LabVIEW.
Ah, okay.
Certified mentalist. So anyone? Everyone? Okay. How many of you have had any more experience than, say, 2 years of LabVIEW? Okay, so a decent number of people. So what I wanted to do is, I'm from the Southwest Lab user group, and that is moi. Thinking about it. Okay. So I'm from the Southwest Lab user group. We run that between ourselves and Awesome Consultants. I'm an engineer in Renishaw. And at Renishaw, we've got effectively 2 user groups that we develop applications for. Mainly they're sort of automated test applications, or functional test equipment applications, or the engineering interfaces, so configuration based.
But yeah, the two users end up being either the operator who's trying to use it to build things, manipulate jigs and so on, or the engineer who's looking at the data of things. So going from that, what I thought I'd do is pitch it at a level where it's sort of very generic and low level. Look at user interfaces and how subpanels have been used in my applications. So a quick show of hands, subpanels, does anyone know what they're not? What they are not? So does anyone? So is anyone not aware of subpanels? That's a good start. So in terms of user experience, you've got lots of different things that we consider while designing UI, obviously. You've got the ergonomics of the user, the usability, how various buttons are in various places, like your swipe. It's quite handy to have it, obvious that you can swipe it and things. The design of it, obviously, the accessibility, how accessible it is, so that you can access certain tools as an operator or a production engineer coming to a particular station to say, what is my status, and so on. So considering all of those things alongside system performance, what we've kind of ended up saying is UI is not, or user experience design is not one size fits all. And having said that, we kind of, having said that, we still needed to have, about 30 developers developing applications that look and feel similar, if not the same. So we kind of ended up looking at subpanels, and defining subpanels was a lot easier than telling people how to write their code. So we take what the, kind of like a MVC controller, model view controller, where you take the user interface abstracted from the control part of it. So a normal HMI, that's what we defined, a wireframe diagram. Go back a step. That's what we sort of said, that's what application is going to look like. Every application is going to look that sort of format where you've got a page, a subpanel where you load your user interface into. So after that point, everything else is, I think most of you must have been into the Mike Bailey presentation this morning. The aspirations to that is to a point where you separate the HMI interaction to HTML, and you define whatever you need to do in code in LabVIEW separate from that. So this is an example of one of our applications which engineers use. It's based on a configuration template. So you can select which VI you want to select on screen, and it just shows it to you. And all of that is through subpanels. So just to show it quick, I'm going to try and attempt to do a demo now. See if this works. In your example finder, you've got subpanels. I'm not going to run my example because it doesn't fit on screen. So a basic example of it is this. So you run your VI, and the ability to change what is on your front panel programmatically or on a user event without having to change any different parts of your VI. So there are no pop-ups and so on. So we ended up with this application over here. So that is a TDMS viewer, if you like, and all it does is just show you different parts of your data, so you can look at that and so on. But the ability to, like all of your configuration windows on LabVIEW, you get to select, if this works, select different tabs, although some of it doesn't look like LabVIEW, some of it still does, and you have different user interfaces to all of those. So I'm going to stop that. So, quite simply, the code to do that is literally just 2 lines of code if you had lines in LabVIEW. And all you do is insert your VI reference into the subpanel, and if the subpanel is already open, you close it and then insert it into it. And the ability to pop out a window, so I'm not sure if many of you went to the next generation LabVIEW presentation this morning. What you would notice is you can pop out different VIs from within the shell. So that's how we define it, so you can double click on any of those configuration tools within here and pop it out as a window as you would normally do. So control double click would just pop it out, and away you go. So the code to do that is as simple as that, where you ignore the fact that I'm using DVRs there, but you remove the VI from the subpanel, set the state, set the value of your selector to -1 so it disappears, so it's a pop-out. Right. So the advantages of Subpanel. It fits well while you're separating the interaction by feature. So when you've got multiple developers developing an application, and you can say, okay, you work on just this part of an application where you've got to worry about the sequencing, for example. So the operators, we've got to be told, step 1, step 2, step 3, you're effectively producing a wizard. So you can separate it by feature quite well in that manner. You can insert and remove front panels from a shell UI without multiple pop-ups. So that's another thing that can be quite annoying at times. The ability to pop out, and also only showing some information on screen which is relevant to the operator at the time. So not having 10 different things on your screen at the same time, so you get confused, or at least operators get confused. And again, it's getting the right information on screen at the right time. Other considerations. I think this has been said quite a few times. Use splitters. And when your Windows resizes this, LabVIEW is not really good at dealing with any of this, but it's again, you've got to consider it. Enable scrolling on subpanels. So on most of ours, what we tend to do is you only have one page, which is a subpanel, and you enable scrollers on it, so you can have it resized to any size you want on screen. Things like when you've got subpanels which look exactly the same but they're a different step, it's quite useful to have either an animation like what you had, scrolling left and right, to show a change in what the user is seeing. Otherwise, the operators tend to get pretty lazy with things. So yeah, that's a quick fire presentation on trying to rush through what
quick fire.
Okay, thank you very much.
I found quite useful with subpanels recently is you can right click and show the top.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's
I used to like them before I knew that.
I always do that. It's not
Yeah, I always do that. It's the Discovery telescope. Yes. It does. It's as simple as all things. It's quite good.
It'll probably work once you start the presentation, mind you, Trevor.
Cheers. Well, I'm going totally off theme. I'm not doing anything to do with user interfaces, so.
Excellent work.
Yeah, Chris Woodhams. I run the Midlands LabVIEW user group. Next meet's on 13th of Feb, so anyone in the area, welcome along. So yeah, what I'm going to cover quickly today is sort of third-party tools, typically sort of focusing on the tools network. Just want to raise a bit of awareness really, and perhaps exposure to a few things you might not know about, and just get people talking about it really. So quickly, just show of hands, who's aware of the tools network? Yeah, who's using tools off the tools network? Good stuff. Okay, cool. So what you can expect from a tool off the network, it's going to either be free or it can cost you up to sort of thousands of pounds, depending on what you're getting. It's a proven functionality as well. So it's been through some rigorous testing, and it goes through set criteria by NI, so they sort of approve things to be allowed to go on the network. So I guess that kind of moves on to the advantages really. You get something that's been fully developed, fully tested, so it kind of saves you doing all the stuff that somebody else has already done in some cases. Other things, advantages, what the things I've come across have been sort of open source, so you can, if you want to delve into the detail of what the tool's made up of, you can do that if you want. There's some other things as well. So and I'll try and think about disadvantages, and I came up with one, but if anyone else has got anything, I'd be interested to hear. It's to do with the versioning of the tool. So I think you can only run one version of the tool within your development environment. So if you're running sort of 4 or 5 projects under version 1 of a certain tool, and then you come to project 6 and you've upgraded your tool and you're running version 2, if you come back to do any mods in your previous projects, you have to then sort of manage the updates to your code to handle that change in the version of the tool. So yeah, I'm going to just jump into some experience that we've had with one of the tools called the Simple TCP Messaging Reference Library, STM. So some of you probably will have come across this, and basically it addresses the challenge of developing a simple and effective communication protocol between sort of an embedded platform and a host or hosts. So a typical example of this is sort of a Compact Rio data logger, where your Compact Rio is an embedded platform, and you've maybe got a PC that's connected to the Compact Rio, and that's your host. So basically on the RT there's sort of 3 bits of code that you need to implement. The first one's an independent loop that's sort of monitoring all of your connections. So this is the snippet from our project. So basically all we're doing there is listening for connections from the host, and once you receive a valid one, you basically create the connection using the STM stuff. And in this case, we remove all the existing connections because we're only managing a single host, and then add that connection to the maintained list. So that's the first aspect that you need to take care of. Then you need to think about the sending of messages from your RT system up to your host. So in this instance, basically you have to retrieve all the connections that you've got live, and then basically send your message up. And it's as simple as sort of getting your string and your data, converting it if necessary, and sending it across using the STM write function. And then the last VI in that for loop there is just basically monitoring the connection. So if connection becomes not live anymore, it basically gets rid of it out of the list. And then the last bit on the embedded side of things is managing message that's being received from the host. So very similar to the send, you basically get all the connections, and in this case we've used, you can actually index out the one that you want. And in a similar way, you're basically polling for whether you've got any messages there. So, and if you don't receive a timeout, then you've got a message, and you can then continue to sort of pass that message and handle it elsewhere in the code. So, as you can see, with this approach, you haven't got to go into any of the real low-level detail of sort of TCP comms. You can sort of handle it with the sort of library functions that you get with the tool. So it's pretty neat. Kind of takes you away from that, really, and simplifies it. So then on the host side of things, you've got the sort of 3 things you've really got to take care of. The first one is creating your connection. So for that, you just need the IP address and the port for which you're going to be connecting to. Then you've got to basically determine what kind of protocol you want to use. So in this case, we're using TCP, but you can set it up for UDP and also serial as well, I think. So yeah, that's literally what you do. You get your IP, get your port, and use the STM function to create that connection. And in the background, it's obviously doing all the bits and pieces that it needs to do to gather all the information that goes along with a TCP connection. And we're just passing that out that VI. And then secondly, this is where we're sort of polling for messages coming up from the RT. So we're literally saying, is there a message? If there isn't, then we just carry on as normal. If there is one, then we do our normal stuff. We pass on the message and convert the data, and then manage all the handling of all that elsewhere. And again, similarly with the sending, so sending message from the host down to the Compact Rio, you need to make sure your data is in string format, and just use the STM write function. So I missed out a bit about the advantages of STM. It basically it lends itself to be able to communicate not just with LabVIEW, so you can use it with sort of C and C++ because it's a string-based protocol. So it's kind of good if you've got some embedded stuff running on your Compact Rio, but you want a UI that's in some other language or vice versa. So it works quite nicely. Okay, so I'm just going to cover another one, which is OpenG. So we've got a bit of experience using the OpenG libraries, which are pretty neat. There's some pretty cool stuff in there. So basically what the OpenG libraries are sort of an extension of some of the native LabVIEW functions. So a couple of them that we've used are the file handling VIs. So these kind of expand on the sort of list folders, move files, copy files, things like that. So quite a good example is the copy function in OpenG. In the native LabVIEW version of it, you basically have a from path to path, and then whether you want to overwrite or not. Within the OpenG, you've got the ability to say, yeah, I want to overwrite, no, I don't want to overwrite, or you can also select whether you want to overwrite only if it's newer. So it's quite neat that it just adds that in for you. So that's time that you may have spent trying to code that up yourself when it's already been done by somebody else. So it saves you time. I think the array manipulation ones are pretty neat as well. So I think everyone's probably used the search array function. The native one, just you've got an array in and a search criteria, and then your output is the sort of first instance of where that occurred. With the OpenG one, you can actually get an array of all the instances of where that occurred. So it's quite a nice way of sort of simplifying that for you, whereas if you didn't use this, you'd have to... So you have to go and sort of code that all up yourself, whereas you can just drop this VI in and it does it all for you. And it's a similar one with the index array as well, where you've got the ability to have an array of indexes going in and an array of values coming out as well. And I just put a couple of simpler ones on there because I think they're pretty cool, because I can remember a couple of occasions with the timing stuff, like the wait for the millisecond period or whatever. The way that I've handled data flow is that I use a sequence structure and then you wire your error or through your sequence structure to handle your data flow. But with the OpenG stuff, they actually build in the error terminals on a little sub VI. But additionally in there, it's got some pretty cool functionality to say if an error occurs, do you still want to execute that timing? So you can actually sort of say, right, I'll bypass that timing because an error occurred, and then you get to your error state a lot quicker. So I thought that was pretty neat. And the random number generator, the native version, just 0 to 1, whereas with the OpenG stuff, you can specify a range. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I know I've had that before in the past. And then a really simple one is the pre-wired error structure. So with the OpenG stuff, you've got, so in your sub VI, you should have all of your code in case with a case structure. Everyone does this, right? And then put your error terminal up to the case structure and you wire your error through. With the OpenG stuff, you can just have that straight onto your palette. So I think some of these are sort of maybe in combination with your quick drop. If you've got that set up, you can save quite a bit of time. So yeah, I thought those ones were pretty cool.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. There's actually a line of people waiting for this next time.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, so if you could finish up in the next minute or two.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
No problem. That's quite handy because I'm the last slide.
Yeah, sorry.
That was warning.
Oh, it should be
a negative
my off one. I've got an off one somewhere.
You got a red light.
I didn't like the off one, it was a bit rude. I was going to doctor it.
I can see where that's going.
Just needed a slight addition.
Yeah, so these are just some that I sort of came across doing the research for this really. There's a number play reader on there and it's free, and I thought that was pretty cool to have that kind of stuff available. It's obviously a pretty niche piece of functionality, but it's something that's available on the Tools Network.
It's quite a good SQLite one, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought I had to get SQLite on there.
Very good SQLite one.
Yeah, James gave us a pretty cool presentation at our last user group, so I thought I'd mention that. So that's really neat, you should definitely check that one out. And there's quite a few sort of enhanced UIs, and there's some of them, quite a lot of them cost a bit dosh, but this is one from Rafa Solutions that's the sort of wooden look, which, I don't know.
Begs the question, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
It's new free. Wooden celery.
And another thing I came across was hidden gems. So that's just a library of a few functions that NI put together that aren't sort of fully tested or fully released, but there's some neat stuff in there. There's a high-res counter and a really cool scroll bar actually that just does all the stuff for you, and you just say start, increment, and it pops up a nice little.
Well, the hidden gems one, there should be a video somewhere by Darren Attinger that tells you how to use all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's his thing.
It's dead easy, isn't it? I think
he's essentially he did a 45-minute presentation on all the good bits of LabVIEW that he uses for his stuff. So he's the guy who wrote Quick Drop, for example. So it's what he uses.
Yeah. But
he's bright.
Check that out. Yeah, thanks very much. And anyone interested in presenting at our user group, then just get in touch. So. Cheers.
See you around.
The one I've got is it's like a and then the rest is just something. You have to look at SWISH.
There's another one missing, isn't there? There should be 2 cards.
My video can't start filming in about 11 this morning, so this could be. Doesn't like it when it gets warm.
Stop the video and start it again.